interested, you were saying about that you a law enforcement background. I'm interested in what has happened to our police. Because, I mean, I'm aware of generally what's happened in terms of the cultural marches and the long march through the institutions and so on. But the police seem to have been particularly badly affected by it. Now, is this, my impression is that this is coming from the Royal College of Policing, is that?
Well, interestingly enough, it goes back even further than that, Ken. In the mid-90s, they started to change the police initial recruitment test, and they targeted various demographics because they were not getting into the police. So they reduced the requirements, and that was back in 96. So throughout that time, it's slowly been chipped away as to the value of being a police officer. So things like, even things like employing officers who are 5'2". Clearly,
Yeah.
God bless them, they may well have the acumen to be a police officer, but they don't have the physical presence to be a police officer. And that's half the battle of being a police officer. If you can see a large 6-foot ex-army bobby coming towards you, you're going to think twice about what you do. So it goes back even further, I think, than we probably think. I definitely put it down to the mid-90s. Of course, Blair coming along in 97, he reduced the requirements even more. And so what's happened over the years is the College of Policing, which was a fairly newish organisation, decided that it would get involved with what's called common purpose, common purposes. And it basically encouraged people to be chief constables. The old days of you staying as a bobby on the beat, where many bobbies were quite happy to stay through their entire career, you were discouraged from doing that. So effectively, you joined the police with a degree in something useless, and as a result, within 2 years, you'd be a sergeant. And then in another 2 years, you'd be an inspector. And you literally spent your career, once you got to chief constable, having been on the streets for about 2 years. And as we now know, particularly in the Metropolitan Police, no one arrests anybody. No one actually fights crime. And if you look at the College of Policing website at the moment, they have a plan of action, a 5-point plan of action for 2022 to 2026. Not once in that does it mention about fighting crime. That's the College of Policing, which is supposed to set the precedent. And that's the organisation that brought in non-crime hate incidents, which is one of the most appalling travesties of any. If that happened in Russia, we'd go, oh, well, it's Russia. But it's happening in Britain. And that is how appalling we have become as a society, because we've allowed liberals to run the roost and effectively destroy this country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in contact a little bit with Alison Pearson of the Telegraph, and you know what happened to her with two people coming to her home on Remembrance Sunday and effectively threatening to lock her up. It's dreadful.
Well, what's happening clearly is there's an attempt to silence people. So if you can see big hitters like Alison Pearson getting a knock at the door on Remembrance Sunday, you as Mr. and Mrs. Average, you're not going to raise your head above the parapet anymore. You're not going to put anything online that you may have put online. So what they're doing effectively is almost a Kafkaesque view of the world. So you're accused of something. We can't tell you what it is. And we don't even tell you that we've recorded this in many cases. And it's only when you do a freedom of information request to the police that you actually find out that this happened 2 years ago. And of course, you then wonder, I wonder why I didn't get that job that I applied for. And of course, a DBS check will show this up. And to me, in this great country of ours, that is one of the greatest travesties that we've allowed politicians of blue and red to get away with.
Yeah, I mean, I would be terrified to do a subject access request. I'd be terrified what I might find.
In your case, Ken, yeah, probably.
But was part of it the kind of push for diversity and inclusion and so on? Did that come partly from the wake of the Stephen Lawrence thing?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back even further. If you go back to Scarman report in 1981, just after the riots that we had in obviously Liverpool and various other places, the Scarman report didn't bring the police out in a great light, and as a result destroyed a lot of morale. Take that forward to 1999, when we had the Macpherson report, when we started talking about things like institutional racism within the organisation. Now, you and I know that institutional racism does not mean every bobby is racist. It means the institution, by its practices and procedures, is racist. Now, I don't agree with that. I was there at that time, and I say this to so many people, Ken. In 32 years of supporting policing from 82 to 2014, I can honestly, with my hand on my heart, tell you, I never saw any police officer acting in a racist manner, or a homophobic manner for that matter. Sexism, okay, there may have been a bit of sexism, I will accept that. But homophobia and racism, I never saw in 32 years. And yet the way that the Macpherson report wrote, it was as though all bobbies needed to check themselves. And of course, the press jumped on that as all bobbies are racist and what a terrible thing it is. And that effectively cut the police service off at the head. And as a result, we've now got police chief constables who, quite frankly, have never, ever arrested anyone, have never investigated any major crime. When I joined, you actually had chief constables who had rows of medals like a Russian admiral, because they'd actually been involved in military service, whether that be Korea. I mean, my first boss in the police in 1982, he'd been at Arnhem. He was a paratrooper at Arnhem. I mean, that's the kind of weight that these people had. Unfortunately, those days are long gone, and what we need is a purge.
Yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying there. I mean, I was very interested when we'll come on to the election that we just had back in June in a second, but I was interested in that when they started having all these things about discovering racists within Reform UK. And they had, I think Channel 4 ran a documentary whereby some actor was filmed. Now, I knew that all of that was nonsense because I had been running for about a year a branch of Reform UK, and never in that time had I heard anybody say anything that was remotely racist or even in any way. So I knew that these things just couldn't be true.